Tonight, the Taliban's message to America. As Kevin Rudd joins NATO allies to plot a new strategy for Afghanistan.
We have troops who are in harm's way, and we owe them everything in our upcoming meetings in Bucharest to ensure that they have an effective strategy, both military and civilian, to ensure that we can prevail.
We ask other NATO nations to step forward with additional forces as well. If we do not defeat the terrorists in Afghanistan, we will face them on our own soil.
Good evening, welcome to Lateline. I'm Tony Jones. Also tonight we'll take a fresh look at the US presidential race with one of the leading scholars of the American electoral system who argues that in the race to become the Democratic presidential candidate, Barack Obama is so far ahead in the delegate count as well as leading by 700,000 in the popular vote that a win for Hillary Clinton has become virtually impossible.
If you take a step back and take a cool look at this, you have to come to the conclusion that it is far more likely than not that Barack Obama will be the Democratic nominee and would go into the fall campaign with a terrain significantly tilted in his favor.
Norman J. Ornstein says the mood for change sweeping America right now would very likely put Obama in the White House. Our interview with the resident political scholar at the American Enterprise Institute is coming up. First, our other headlines. The right to remain silent. China jails a leading activist just a day after a damning report on its abuses of civil rights. Clinging to power. Rumours abound in Zimbabwe as Robert Mugabe considers his next move after losing control of the parliament. And a Lateline business, a glimmer of hope. Opus Prime's receiver says investors could still get back some of their money. Well, after moving his touring party to Europe, the Prime Minister has used his first day on the continent to call for an increase in troops in Afghanistan. Yesterday, Kevin Rudd was in Brussels for meetings with the European Commission. Now he's taken his message on Afghanistan to Romania, where he'll become the first Australian Prime Minister to address a NATO summit. And there's fresh evidence his call for a troop surge is justified. The Taliban has released a DVD of a suicide bombing in southern Afghanistan. The ABC's political correspondent Chris Uhlmann filed this report from Bucharest.
A gesture of Taliban defiance against NATO, as a suicide bomber targets a US Army base in southeastern Afghanistan. The bombing techniques are as sophisticated as the propaganda. This DVD is timed to coincide with the NATO summit, considering whether to put more troops on the ground.
I hope that the politicians and those who meet in Bucharest, those who make those decisions, will be generous, and some more will come this way.
That plea is already being heard. France will send a battalion of troops to eastern Afghanistan, freeing up the US to support Canadian forces in the south.
The United States is deploying an additional 3,500 Marines. Romania is adding forces, as are several other allies. We ask other NATO nations to step forward with additional forces as well. If we do not defeat the terrorists in Afghanistan, we will face them on our own soil.
In Brussels for a meeting with the President of the European Commission, Kevin Rudd adds his voice.
We have troops who are in harm's way, and we owe them everything in our upcoming meetings in Bucharest and all those other troops on the ground in Afghanistan to ensure that they have an effective strategy, both military and civilian, to ensure that we can prevail and assist the government in Kabul to establish proper control over the country.
But his host is offering nothing.
Tomorrow, both of us will be discussing this issue in Bucharest in the context of the NATO summit.
The United States has long complained that some European NATO members are keeping their troops away from the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan. On this, Kevin Rudd is in lockstep with George W. Bush.
These are the terrorists that planned and executed attacks on the United States on 11 September 2001, which was in every respect an attack on the collective civilization of the West. Australia is an ally of the United States. Australia is a proud ally of the United States. Much of Europe is an ally of the United States. Those attacks were the cold-blooded murder of over 3,000 people from all over the world. We have to make sure we prevent the threat of similar attacks in the future.
Many of the roads around the Romanian capital have been locked down for the NATO summit, and the Australian Prime Minister will speak to this forum for the first time, speaking on behalf of the United States. And many here might wonder how this new government is different from the old. Chris Ullman, Lateline.
Meanwhile, in Iraq, the firebrand Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has called for 1 million people to march against what he calls the US occupation next Wednesday, the 5th anniversary of the fall of Baghdad. In the cleric's stronghold of Basra yesterday, it's claimed that at least 3 civilians were killed in a US airstrike. An American military spokesman acknowledged that the attack had destroyed a house, but said it was a targeted raid which killed a Shiite militant. The strike is believed to signal a change of tactics in the Iraqi government's offensive against the militants after unsuccessfully attempting to tackle them head-on in clashes last week. Well, just a day after the release of a report criticising China over its human rights record, a prominent Chinese dissident has been sentenced to 3.5 years jail for inciting subversion of state power. The 34-year-old activist Hu Jia had become one of China's most vocal proponents of democratic rights after initially being an advocate for AIDS sufferers. But today he learnt the price of criticising the ruling Communist Party. ABC correspondent Charlotte Glennie reports from Beijing.
Security was tight at the Beijing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court when Hu Jia was brought in by prison van. Plainclothes officers watched on, along with a dozen foreign diplomats from places including Australia, Canada and the European Union. Hu Jia's supporters were also there, many of them petitioners with their own grievances. He aroused Chinese people's awareness for protecting human rights, says this woman. I joined this path for the protection of my own rights. China's legal system needs people like him for justice to move forward, says another man. Hu Jia was detained last December after posting political articles on overseas websites and giving interviews to foreign reporters. According to the Chinese media, he spread malicious rumours and repeatedly instigated other people to subvert the state's political power and socialist system. His trial took place last month and lasted just a few hours. Right now, Hu Jia will be hearing his sentence. We understand his wife, baby daughter, mother and mother-in-law have been allowed into the court, but journalists have been kept outside, and so have foreign diplomats. After a short time, Hu Jia's lawyer appeared, saying his client had been sentenced to 3.5 years jail, guilty of inciting subversion.
We defendants tried to draw a line between national safety and freedom of speech. Only by making a clear line on this can we prevent defying and limiting people's freedom in the name of endangering public safety.
Hu Jia's wife has also often criticised the government, and she's under house arrest herself. Today, after negotiating with police, she was allowed a brief reprieve, the chance to venture outside the court to tell journalists she's scared.
If I do not cooperate, they said they would take me away and allow me to feed my child only once every 3 hours. How can I not cooperate with them under this circumstance? I cannot afford to sacrifice my child after sacrificing my husband.
Hu Jia's mother says she believes his son is innocent.
I told the judge just now that I hope Hu Jia is the last person to be jailed for speaking his mind. He's paid a price for this. As a mother, I believe Hu Jia is a good person. He loves his motherland.
Nearby, Hu Jia's mother-in-law held his tiny daughter. If he serves all of his sentence, she'll be 4 when he's released. The Olympic Games will have been and gone, and human rights organisations question whether China's human rights record will be any better for hosting them. Charlotte Glennie, Lateline.
Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party has lost its majority in Zimbabwe's parliament for the first time in almost 30 years. Official results show the opposition movement for democratic change has won the most seats, with 2 minor parties holding the balance of power. While there's still no announcement on the results of the presidential vote, one South African newspaper is reporting that Mugabe has admitted to his family and advisers that he'd lost and is weighing up whether to walk away or contest a runoff against MDC leader Morgan Tsvangirai. Africa correspondent Andrew Gagan filed this report.
Riot police out in force on the streets of Harare as Robert Mugabe's waiting game puts nerves on edge.
Keep it up. Keep it up.
In a country where intimidation rules, the question on everyone's mind is, will he stay on no matter what? Celebrating its parliamentary results, the opposition jumped the gun on the presidential poll and did its own tally.
President Mugabe Richard Changirai has won this election. He has won this election. He has won this election without a runoff.
And it's the question of a runoff election that could be crucial. At his palace in the capital, Zimbabwe's dictator is believed to be plotting his future. Opponents fear that the government-controlled electoral commission will play into his hands and give him the result he needs. If that happens, the signs are ominous.
There is now, a story that he might actually use the Presidential Powers Temporary Measures Act to say 3 weeks is not enough for the runoff. He might make the law to say it will be 3 months. If that happens, there will be 3 months of torture, 3 months of pain. He is likely to deploy the war veterans, the ZANU-PF militia, the soldiers, every force, every coercive apparatus of the state onto the people of Zimbabwe, and he will hope that they will intimidate the people so much they will vote for him after the period, whichever it will be.
But there's also a different view, with reports that even some of Mugabe's most loyal supporters feel he's finished and that they're plotting their own survival with or without him. For now, though, the waiting game goes on, leaving a battered country in limbo. Andrew Gagan, Lateline.
And just a short time ago, Robert Mugabe made his first public appearance since last weekend's polls. He didn't make any comment as he appeared alongside the former Sierra Leone President, Ahmed Kabar. Kabar is the head of the African Union mission which monitored the joint parliamentary and presidential elections held on Saturday.